So, hello everybody. Today we'll talk about the major arteries in the body. You know that there are three types of blood vessels are present in the body: the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. So, the arteries are the blood vessels that take the blood away from the heart. Okay, so arteries take the blood away from the heart, and large arteries give branches to the medium-sized arteries, and then the medium-sized arteries give blood to the small arteries. Okay, so this is a large artery, then these are medium-sized arteries, and then the small arteries, and the small arteries are called arterioles. Okay, so arterioles are the smallest arteries, and where the arterioles end, the capillaries start from there. Capillaries form beds, networks. Okay, so this is a capillary bed, a network of capillaries. Okay, and then from the other side of the capillary bed, the venous system starts. So small vein receives blood from the capillary bed and gives the blood to a larger vein, and then the larger veins take the blood into the heart. Now, the arterial system in systemic circulation carries oxygen rich blood, oxygenated blood. Okay, in systemic circulation, arteries carry oxygen rich blood or oxygenated blood, and that which enters into the capillary bed. And what happens here, outside of the capillary you have the tissue. So from the capillary, oxygen and nutrients, those two things, so enter into the tissue. Okay, and from the tissue, carbon dioxide and metabolic wastes enter into the capillaries. So that is the exchange of chemicals take place through the capillary wall. So capillaries are for the exchange of chemicals. The chemicals that your tissue needs enter from the capillary blood into the tissue, and the tissue produces carbon dioxide and metabolic wastes. Those are toxic. They will enter into the blood. So now the capillary blood gets carbon dioxide and releases oxygen, and by doing that the capillary blood becomes deoxygenated, and that deoxygenated then goes to the heart. Okay, to the heart. So that is how the circulatory system in systemic circulation works. Okay, so the definition of arteries is arteries always take the blood away from the heart. It doesn't matter what kind of blood, because in systemic circulation arteries take the oxygen rich blood, but in pulmonary circulation arteries take deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs, where blood gets oxygen, right? So it is not true that all arteries carry oxygen rich blood. Only in systemic circulation arteries carry oxygen rich blood, but in pulmonary circulation it is opposite. Arteries carry carbon dioxide rich blood to the lung. Okay, but arteries always take the blood away from the heart. Veins always bring the blood or move the blood towards the heart. So opposite direction. And in systemic circulation, veins transport deoxygenated blood, that means carbon dioxide rich blood. However, in pulmonary circulation, it is always opposite. Veins bring the oxygen rich blood back into the heart. Okay, and capillaries, as I already mentioned, are for the exchange of chemicals and located in between the arterial system and venous system, between arteries and veins. Now, three types of arteries are present in the body. Elastic arteries are the large arteries, those are close to the heart, and elastic arteries are also known as conducting arteries. Okay, so your aorta and its major branches, those are elastic arteries. Okay, and why they are called elastic arteries? Because in the wall of the large arteries you have more elastic fibers. Okay, that's why elastic fibers in the wall of the elastic arteries. That means what? That means elastic arteries can expand when pressure increases inside. Since the wall has elastic fibers, the elasticity is present in the wall, and that will change the shape of the artery. Okay, so which is helpful because you know that large arteries receive blood from the heart, and when heart contracts forcefully, suddenly a lot of blood enters into the elastic arteries, right? So the arteries can expand to receive that blood. Otherwise, if the arteries cannot expand, then some blood will be flow back into the heart. Since the arteries can expand, so when the blood enters into the arteries, they can accommodate or take that blood inside them. Okay, muscular arteries are medium-sized arteries, and they are called distributing arteries. And then smallest arteries are arterioles, as I mentioned before. Now, why the muscular arteries are called distributing arteries and why they are called muscular arteries? Because if you see the wall of a muscular artery, the wall has more smooth muscle fibers. Okay, so in the muscular artery you have more muscle fibers than the elastic arteries. In the elastic arteries you have more elastic fibers than the muscular arteries. Okay, and muscular arteries are called the distributing arteries because from the large elastic arteries, muscular arteries arise and give the blood to different organs, for example to your liver, to your kidney, right? And smallest arteries are arterioles, and they lead to capillary beds that I showed you in first slide. Here you see three types of arteries: elastic artery, muscular artery, arterial. Now if you see the amount of elastic and muscle tissue, this blue histograms are showing the amount of elastic tissue and red is showing the smooth muscle. So let's see the elastic artery. You see, if you compare the amount of elastic tissue, between the muscular artery and elastic artery. In elastic artery, the amount is more. If you compare the amount of smooth muscle in the wall of elastic artery and muscular artery, in the wall of muscular artery, the amount of smooth muscle is more than the elastic artery, right? And this is the arterial. Now we'll see the capillary. The wall of a capillary is formed by a single layer of squamous cells. So simple squamous. Okay, so really very thin and very permeable, which helps for the exchange of chemicals that I mentioned before, that through the wall of the capillaries exchange of chemicals take place. So the wall is extremely thin and that allows that exchange of chemicals. And then small veins are called the venules. Okay, the wall of the venule is also very thin. You have a small amount of smooth muscle, that means a thin layer of smooth muscle, and the innermost layer is the endothelium, squamous cell layer. So that's the venule. And if you see the wall of a vein, the wall of a vein is thinner than the wall of an artery. In next lecture, I'll give you an idea about the wall of an artery and a vein. Just know that the wall of a vein is thin and the wall of an artery is thick. Venules are present in the other side of the arterioles that I showed you. So where the capillaries end, the venules start. So venules receive the blood, deoxygenated blood from the capillaries. The wall of the venule is very porous, so allow the fluid and white blood cells and around some venules you have few pericytes, one type of cells around the endothelium. So around the squamous tissue, simple squamous, you have pericytes. These are the pericytes. In post-capillary venules have pericytes usually. Veins are formed when the venules converge and the wall is thinner, as I mentioned, and the lumen is larger since the wall is thin compared to the corresponding arteries. Blood pressure inside the vein is much lower than inside the arteries because arteries first receive the blood from the heart. So when heart pumps the blood forcefully, first blood enters into the arteries, right? So the pressure on the arterial wall or inside the artery is much higher. Then blood goes through the large arteries, medium-sized arteries, small arteries or arterioles, and then blood passes through the capillaries before it enters into the vein. So after passing through all those structures, the blood gets really slow and the pressure inside the vein is very low. Uh, just before we move to the next slide, in the wall of the artery or vein, there are three layers: tunica externa, tunica media, and tunica intima. So tunica externa is the outermost covering or outermost layer of the wall of the artery or vein. Both arterial and venous wall have the outermost connective tissue layer that is mainly for the protection, and that is called tunica externa. Externa means outside, right? External. So tunica is layer. which is connective tissue. Okay, and then middle layer is really thick, smooth muscle layer compared to the outer and inner layer. Middle layer is thicker and formed by smooth muscle, and that is called the tunica media, which is a smooth muscle. Okay, and then the innermost thin simple squamous layer, and that is called the endothelium, tunica intima. Okay, so this is tunica intima, innermost thin layer. Simple squamous, simple squamous. It is also called what? Endothelium. Endo means inside, endothelium. It makes the inner surface smooth. Okay, so blood will flow without friction. So those are three layers in the wall of an artery or a vein. Here I already showed you the largest arteries are the elastic arteries, the larger arteries. The medium sized arteries are the muscular or distributing arteries, and the small arteries are the arterioles. Okay, so this is the arterial, the muscular artery, elastic artery, and then this is the capillary bed here, and then venule, small vein, and then small vein gives blood to the venules are the smallest veins, give blood to the small veins, then small veins give blood to the larger veins. Okay, and finally two large veins, superior inferior vena cava, they give the blood to the heart, right side of the heart. Okay, differences between pulmonary and systemic circulations. Systemic circulation is the circulation between the heart and heart and the body. So between the heart and the whole body. Okay, pulmonary circulation is the circulation of blood between the heart and the lungs, two lungs. Okay, systemic circulation is high pressure circulatory system, high pressure circulatory system. That means inside the systemic circulation, the pressure of blood is high. Inside the pulmonary circulation, the pressure of blood is low. So it is considered as a low pressure system. Okay, and systemic circulation is much wider. Okay, larger circulation because systemic circulation supplies blood throughout the body. So it is a wider circulatory system, and pulmonary circulation is a smaller or short circulatory system or short circuit system. So this is wider or broad or long circulatory system because between the heart and the whole body, and this is short circulatory system because the lungs are very close to the heart, so between the heart and the lungs. Okay, and in systemic circulation, as I mentioned already, arteries carry what type of blood? Oxygenated blood, and veins carry deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood. Okay. In case of pulmonary, it is opposite. Arteries carry oxygen-rich blood, or arteries carry deoxygenated blood, and veins carry oxygenated blood. Okay, opposite of systemic. So these are few important differences between the systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. Those are two main types of circulations in the body. There is another type of circulation that is called the portal circulation, also present between the two capillary systems. Now we'll see the major arteries in the body. First, I'll give you an overview. So you know that in case of systemic circulation, blood circulates between the heart and the whole body. Okay, so this is the left ventricle. So from the left ventricle, blood first enters into the aorta, and aorta has three parts: the ascending part, aortic arch, and descending part. Okay, so this is the heart. Okay, this is the left ventricle. From here, the large artery that receives the blood is the aorta, and this is the ascending aorta, first part of the aorta. Then second part is the aortic arch, and then third part is the descending aorta. It goes actually behind the heart, and heart rests on the diaphragm, you must remember. So it goes behind the heart and then passes through the diaphragm and enters into the abdominal cavity and becomes the abdominal aorta. Okay, so you see three parts. This part is the first part, ascending aorta. This is the arch, second part, and this is the third part. The longest part is the descending aorta. Now the descending aorta has two parts, right? Above the diaphragm, this is the thoracic part, thoracic aorta, and below the diaphragm, this part is the abdominal aorta. Okay, so long descending aorta has two parts: above the diaphragm, thoracic part or thoracic aorta, and below the diaphragm, abdominal aorta. Now, from the ascending aorta, two very important arteries arise and enter into the wall of the heart. Those are the right and left coronary arteries. Make sense? So two coronary arteries arise from the ascending aorta, and they take the blood to the wall of the heart. Very important arteries. Then from the aortic arch, three arteries arise. What are those three arteries? The first one is called the brachiocephalic trunk, brachiocephalic trunk, and then middle one is left common carotid artery, and third one, the leftmost one, is left subclavian artery. So brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid, and left subclavian. So you got left common carotid and left subclavian. So where are the right common carotid and right subclavian? They are the branches of or divisions of the brachiocephalic trunk. So now you see brachiocephalic trunk. Trunk means short artery, so it divides immediately after the trunk is formed. So here brachiocephalic trunk divides into right common carotid and right subclavian. Now you see you got two common carotids, right common carotid and left common carotid. They take the blood towards the head, and right subclavian and left subclavian, they take blood towards the arm. So under the clavicle, that's why called subclavian. So they will head towards the arm. First they will pass through the under the clavicle. So here you see the ascending aorta, okay, then aortic arch, then descending aorta above the diaphragm. This is the diaphragm, thoracic and abdominal aorta, okay. And then what happens, the lower end of abdominal aorta divides into two common iliac. So this is left common iliac and this is the right common iliac, okay. So here you see the common iliac. This is the left common iliac, this is the right common iliac, okay. And this is the abdominal aorta inside the abdomen here, and you see abdominal aorta gives a number of branches for the internal organs. Renal arteries take the blood from the aorta to the kidneys, suprarenal arteries to the adrenal glands, then celiac trunk divides into gastric, splenic, hepatic. They take blood to those organs, okay. Superior, inferior, mesenteric to the intestines. We'll talk about that. Just know that the abdominal aorta, since inside the abdomen you have several organs, they get blood from the abdominal aorta. And the lower end of the abdominal aorta divides into two common iliac, right and left. And the common iliac divides into internal iliac and external iliac. External iliac is bigger, internal iliac is smaller. So these are internal iliacs and external iliac. Internal iliac stays in the pelvic cavity and supplies blood to the pelvic organs, and external iliac goes to the thigh, okay. So that is the overall idea. So let me quickly review so we can then talk more. So from the left ventricle, blood enters into the ascending aorta first, and the ascending aorta gives two important branches, right and left coronary arteries. Then aortic arch gives three arteries: brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid, left subclavian. Brachiocephalic trunk divides into right common carotid and right subclavian, okay. Common carotids both move towards the head, and subclavian goes under the clavicle towards the arm, okay. And then descending aorta is divided by the diaphragm. Above the diaphragm is thoracic part. From the thoracic aorta we get some arteries, intercostal arteries and superior phrenic arteries. Intercostal arteries go in between the ribs and supply blood to the intercostal muscles and other muscles. That's why called intercostal arteries, in between the ribs, in the intercostal spaces. And also thoracic aorta give two superior phrenic arteries for the diaphragm. Okay. Then below the diaphragm, the part of the descending aorta is the abdominal aorta. It gives a number of branches for the organs, and then the lower end divides into right and left common iliac arteries. Okay. Now we'll see what happens to the common carotid. This is one side, so this is the right common carotid artery. Okay, this one. So let's see what happens. You see, this is the brachiocephalic trunk. It divides into right subclavian. This is the right subclavian and right common carotid. So I told you that common carotids take the blood towards the head. So let's see what happens. This one is going towards the head, right? Right common carotid. Left does the same. And then the common carotid, when you will hear the term common, just think that it will divide into external and internal. So this one divides into external. So this is the external carotid artery, and this is the internal carotid artery. Internal goes into the cranial cavity. Makes sense, right? Internal carotid, and mainly supplies blood to the brain, internal part of the head. And external carotid supplies mainly blood to the outer part of the head, that means to the scalp, bones, right? uh, facial muscles, those are the structures, those are the outer structures of the head, and they receive blood from the branches of the external carotid. Okay, so you see here, uh, this is a branch of external carotid that goes to the face, so facial artery, and this one goes to the temporal area of the head, so superficial temporal artery. Make sense? So those are the branches of the external carotid, and supplies blood to the skin, scalp, the muscles of the head and face, right? And also to the bones. Then internal carotid mainly supplies blood to the brain. Okay, now we'll see the subclavian. This is the clavicle. So they have dissected the clavicle here, so you can see the whole artery here. So this is the subclavian. From the subclavian, three arteries arise here. You can see this is the vertebral artery. So this is one side. Same way, from the other subclavian, left subclavian, you get left vertebral arteries. So two vertebral arteries take blood to the brain. So now you got two pairs of arteries, they take the blood to the brain, two internal carotids and two vertebral. Those are the main arteries supply blood to the brain. Okay. Then this one, the middle one, is the thyrocervical trunk. You see, it divides. One branch is going to the thyroid gland here, and another is to the cervical or neck area. That's why it is called thyrocervical. It gives branches, go to the thyroid gland and the cervical part or neck part. And this one is the costocervical. It gives two branches you see here. One is going down to the ribs, towards the ribs. That's why costo, and another towards the neck, cervical. So costocervical, thyrocervical, vertebral. Okay, those three arise from the subclavian, and then subclavian goes to the armpit and becomes the axillary artery. Okay, now you already know that two internal carotids take the blood to the brain. So this is one, this is another. Okay, two internal carotids. And two vertebral, you see here, these two are vertebral arteries. They join together to form the basilar artery in the bottom of the brain, where you have the pons and medulla oblongata. They join together in that area. These two vertebral arteries join to form the basilar artery. So this is the basilar artery, and the branches of the basilar artery and the branches of internal carotids, they form a circle here, and this is called the circle of Willis. Okay, this circle is very important, because if any blockage occurs anywhere, like if any blockage occurs here in the artery, then since it is a circle, the blood, instead of going this way, blood will find a different route, okay, to reach here. So that's the importance of that circle of Willis. It is in the bottom of the brain and formed by the branches of the basilar artery and internal carotid arteries. Okay, and basilar artery is formed by the union of two vertebral arteries. Okay, now we'll see the subclavian artery becomes the axillary artery, right, in the armpit area, and then goes to the arm and becomes the brachial artery. So this is the brachial artery. Here is the axillary artery. Here is the subclavian artery. Okay, so brachial artery is important because you know that that is the artery we often take the blood pressure or measure the blood pressure, okay, in the brachial artery. And from the brachial artery, you see this artery here arises, and this branch goes around the humerus. This is the bone humerus, so that's why it is called circumflex humeral artery. Makes sense? Circumflex humeral artery. There are two, anterior and posterior. Okay, circumflex means circling around, going like a circle. Okay, around what? The humerus. That's why called the circumflex humeral arteries. Okay, and the lower end of the brachial artery divides into the radial, which is the lateral one, and ulnar, the medial one. And these arteries are named after the bones they run along with. So in the radial side, radial artery, and ulnar side, ulnar artery. So thumb side is the radial lateral artery. And we take the heartbeat or pulse, we measure or count the heart rate from here of the lower end of the radial artery. This is a good location. Why? Because under the radial artery there is no soft tissue. It directly lies or rests on the lower end of the radius, that means on the bone. So when you press this artery, it won't go down, because under this radial artery in this part you have the bone radius, so easy to take the pulse. Okay, and then the radial and ulnar arteries, they divide uh, like this. So this is the radial artery, this is the ulnar artery, and they divide like this into two branches. Okay, and join together those two branches. Okay, and form two arches. This is one, this is another. So one is superficial palmar arch, another is the deep palmar arch in the palm. And from the palmar arch we get the digital arteries for the fingers. Okay, so that's how you see the upper limb arterial supply in your upper limb. Now we'll see the thoracic part. You see here, you remember I already mentioned that this is the thoracic aorta above the diaphragm, and from the thoracic aorta intercostal arteries arise, right? So the main branches are the intercostal arteries between the ribs, pass through the intercostal spaces, okay? And also from the thoracic we get two superior mesenteric, they go to the two superior phrenic arteries. Superior phrenic means diaphragm, arteries, okay, from the thoracic, lower part of the thoracic aorta, okay. And then the aorta pierces through the diaphragm here and enters into the abdomen and becomes the abdominal aorta. Abdominal aorta has several branches, as I mentioned before, because in your abdomen you have several organs. So first, from the very upper part of the abdominal aorta, two arteries arise and go to the diaphragm from below. You remember from the thoracic aorta, I just mentioned in last slide, two phrenic arteries arise and go to the diaphragm. So those are superior phrenic arteries, right? Superior phrenic from the thoracic aorta and supply blood to the diaphragm, and also from the upper part of the abdominal aorta, inferior phrenic, two inferior phrenic go to the diaphragm. Since these are coming from above, they are superior. These are going from below. These are inferior phrenic. And then you have a trunk, short artery, short broad artery. This is called the celiac trunk. And celiac trunk gives three branches. You see here, 1, 2, 3. One is going through the liver, that is the hepatic. Makes sense? Another is going to the spleen, that is splenic, this one. And another is going to the stomach, that is gastric. So celiac trunk, it gives three branches. Hepatic for the liver, it goes to the liver. Splenic goes to the spleen, and gastric goes to the stomach. The name tells you, right? Gastric means stomach, refers to stomach, splenic, and hepatic refers to the liver. So those are three branches of the celiac trunk and how those organs get blood from the celiac trunk. Then this is another artery. This is called superior mesenteric artery. Mesenteric, if you hear the term mesenteric, it supplies or goes to the intestine. Superior mesenteric goes to the upper part of the intestine, that means the small, mainly to the small intestine. Okay, and this is inferior mesenteric. So lower part of the intestine, that means mainly goes to the large intestine. There is some overlapping, but just know that mostly small intestine receives blood from the superior mesenteric and large intestine mostly receives blood from the inferior mesenteric. So these are all single arteries, unpaired or single arteries. Celiac trunk is only one, superior mesenteric is only one, inferior mesenteric is only one. However, from the abdominal aorta we also get paired arteries. One I have already explained, right? Inferior phrenic there are two, so infraphrenic are paired, and then two renal arteries, right and left, for the kidneys, paired arteries, two suprarenal arteries going to the adrenal glands or suprarrenal glands. So those are paired arteries. Two gonads receive blood from the gonadal arteries. So you have two testes in male and two ovaries, those are the gonads. So two gonadal arteries, right, for the gonads, and two lumbar arteries for the back muscles. So you see, those are the paired arteries. So from the abdominal aorta, unpaired arteries are celiac trunk, superior mesenteric, inferior mesenteric, and paired arteries are inferior phrenic for the diaphragm, renal for the kidneys, suprarenal for the adrenal glands, gonadals for the testes in male, ovaries in female, right, and lumbar for the back muscles. Okay, so those are the paired arteries. And then what happens? The lower end of the abdominal aorta divides into two common iliac arteries. Okay, right and left common iliac. Then common iliac divides into external iliac and internal iliac. Internal iliac is a smaller one and external iliac is the bigger one. Internal iliac remains in the pelvic cavity and supplies blood to the pelvic organs, and external iliac is the larger one, goes to the thigh. So let's see what happens. So this is the common iliac, right side, right common iliac, right? And it divides into smaller internal iliac here and larger external iliac. So internal iliac and external iliac. External iliac is the bigger one that goes to the thigh and becomes the femoral artery. This is the femoral part of the body and only bone is femur, so femoral artery. And from the upper part of the femoral artery, you see this artery arises, and that is called the circumflex femoral artery. You remember from the brachial artery we got the circumflex humeral because around the humerus in the arm, and this one is called circumflex femoral because around the femur. Okay, and the circumflex femoral divides into ascending and descending two branches. Okay, and then you see here when the femoral artery goes to the back of the knee, it becomes popliteal artery because that area is called the popliteal area. Okay, so this is the popliteal artery here, and then popliteal artery gives the anterior tibial. Okay, and goes down and gives the fibular and posterior tibial. So this is anterior tibial here, posterior tibial is here, and fibular is the lateral one. Okay, so in the leg, two tibial, anterior in front of the tibia, posterior behind the tibia, and fibular is only one. So two tibial, anterior and posterior, and one fibular. And those are the two bones, you know, that tibia and fibula in the leg. So these arteries are named after the bones, right? Here femoral, femur, and in the leg tibia and fibular. And then what happens in the leg, the front of the ankle, the anterior tibial, when it goes to the front of the ankle, its name becomes dorsalis pedis artery. Okay, so in the front of the ankle, dorsalis pedis, and it forms the arcuate artery, an arch like this here in the dorsal surface of the foot, The upper surface is the dorsal and sole is the plantar, right? So arcuate artery, and then from the arcuate we get the metatarsal arteries, dorsal, that means the upper surface of the foot. Okay. Here you can see more clearly, this is the back of the knee. So you see the popliteal artery in the back of the knee, and it gives anterior tibial, the branch that goes to the front of the tibia. That's why you don't see it anymore. So it runs to along the front of the tibia, and then the popliteal goes down and divides into fibular and posterior tibial. Okay, so posterior tibial and fibular. And now we'll see what happens to the posterior tibial. You see the posterior tibial goes down through the back of the heel, and it splits in the plantar surface. This is the sole, splits into medial and lateral plantar arteries. Okay, lateral plantar and medial plantar, and then they join together to form the plantar arch, and from the plantar arch we get the branches. So that's how the arteries are in the lower limbs. Okay, so in next lecture we'll talk about the venous system. So to briefly talk about the arterial system that I just discussed, this is your heart, this is the diaphragm. Okay, and from the left side of your heart, from the left ventricle, ascending aorta receives blood, and it becomes what? The aortic arch. The second part is the aortic arch, and then descending aorta, it goes to the back of the heart, so most part is not seen from the front, and then pierces through the diaphragm, right, like this. So descending aorta is very long because it goes all the way to the lower part of the abdominal cavity. So from the ascending, do you remember which two very important arteries go to the wall of the heart? Coronary arteries, right and left coronary arteries. Those are the branches of the ascending aorta. And from the aortic arch, how many? Three. Remember that? The rightmost one is the brachiocephalic trunk, then left common carotid and left subclavian. Okay, and where are the right common carotid and right subclavian? They are the divisions of the brachiocephalic trunk. So now you see, this is the left common carotid directly from the aortic arch, and this is the right common carotid from the brachiocephalic trunk. So we got two common carotids, right? And they go towards the head. Okay, and common divides into what? Internal carotid and external carotid. Internal mainly to the brain, internal part of the head, and external mainly to the outer part of the head, that means to the face, bones, muscles, skin, to the cranial bones and scalp. So the common carotid divides into external carotid and internal carotid. Okay, and subclavian. Subclavian goes under the clavicle, and from subclavian we get three arteries. Vertebral takes the blood to the brain, then thyrocervical and costocervical, those three. Okay, and then subclavian goes to the armpit and becomes what? The axillary armpit, and then to the arm it becomes what? The brachial, with measure the blood pressure from the arm, right, from this artery. And from the brachial, the artery that arises and goes around the humerus, that is the circumflex humeral artery, right. And then brachial artery divides into radial and what, ulnar, in the forearm. Okay, so radial and ulnar, and they divide into two branches to form two arches. Remember that I did draw this before, two arches in the palm, superficial and deep palmar arches. Okay, and then from the arches we get the digital for the fingers. So that is the upper limb. Then from the thoracic part of the aorta, descending aorta, we get several intercostal arteries. Okay, and also we get two superior phrenic arteries for the diaphragm. Okay, to the diaphragm, superior phrenic. Now let's see the abdominal aorta. From the very upper part, two inferior phrenic go to the diaphragm. So superior phrenic from the thoracic aorta, inferior phrenics from the abdominal aorta, and all those go to the diaphragm. And from the front we get the unpaired single arteries, celiac trunk. It gives how many branches? 3: hepatic, gastric, splenic. Okay, so this is celiac trunk. Then superior mesenteric for the intestine, right? Superior is mainly for the small intestine, inferior mesenteric mainly for the large intestine. Okay, and paired arteries are what? 2 for the kidneys, those are renal. 2 for the adrenal glands, suprarenal. Okay, 2 for the gonads, gonadals. 2 lumbars, right, and those are called the paired arteries. And lower end of the abdominal aorta divides into 2 common iliac, and then common iliac divides into internal and external. Internal one is smaller and external is the bigger one, goes to the lower limb, to the thigh, becomes the femoral artery, right, and behind the knee becomes popliteal, and then the popliteal goes down, gives the anterior tibial a branch, and then goes down, gives posterior tibial and fibular. Okay, so those are the arteries enter in the leg. Then subclavian, I talked about that, the upper limb. So that's how the blood supply through the arterial system in the body.